How did you enter this world of becoming an expert in the Muslim Brotherhood?
I came home from work one day. My daughter, she was 7 years old. She said, "Daddy, I don't want to be a Muslim." There are some people who say that Islam is the problem. There are some people that say it's got nothing to do with Islam. The reality is, they're both partially right and they're both partially wrong. There has been a plan by Islamists to influence their surroundings, to eventually undermine the liberal democracies and try to take over as much as they can. The tactic is the opium of the masses, and the opium of the masses is to destroy Israel and wipe it off the map. But ultimately, if Israel didn't exist, the ideology would create something else. We found ourselves dealing with what we coined the triple threat to our liberal democracies, this natural marriage between Islamists and the regressive left, and now we're seeing that they're actually targeting the nationalist far right. And the thing that binds them all together is that they hate Jews and they hate Israel.
It's a bit overwhelming to hear everything. We're sitting here today with Haras Rafiq, who is the Vice President of ISGAP. Nice to be sitting with you today.
My pleasure, thank you for having me.
So first, I want to know a little bit about who you are, where do you come from, and how did you enter this world of becoming an expert in the Muslim Brotherhood?
So my background is that I was born in the United Kingdom. From my mother's side, my family's been there for about 124 years. I grew up, born in the UK in 1965, I grew up like anybody else at my time. Inside the house, I was very much from an Asian, Pakistani, Indian culture. We ate the food, we did everything else everybody else did. Piety in terms of Islam and Muslims. Outside of the house, I was English, British, just like everybody else. I went through the phases that all of my friends went through. I was a punk rocker at the age of 14. I thought I could sing. I was in 3 bands. I didn't sing very well. Went to university, and after university I ended up in the corporate world on the board of some serious corporate organizations. And at the time, nobody actually identified me by my faith. In the United Kingdom, certainly at that time, there was no such thing as faith-based identity politics. And then I remember, this is circa 2003, my daughter, my youngest, she was 7 years old. And I came home from work one day and she said, "Daddy, I don't want to be a Muslim." I said, "Why don't you want to be a Muslim? What have we done to you?" And she said, "Muslims are always angry. They're always killing people. I don't want to be angry. I don't want to kill anybody. I'm only 7 years old." And you can imagine how I felt. So I said, "Show me, where are you getting these messages from?" And this was just post 9/11. And she put on the television, and there was the Taliban, and they were burning effigies of George Bush and Tony Blair, firing rifles. And something hit me. And the thought hit me that here was a young child in a Muslim household who didn't understand anything about geopolitics. She didn't really understand her faith. She saw mummy and daddy and a bit older brother fasting when it's Ramadan, praying usually when we're in trouble and we want something from God, but praying regularly, believers. She, by getting these messages from television and other places, she was associating our religion, Islam, with violence and murder and wanting and having to hate somebody else. And then it hit me. If she's feeling that, what about my neighbours who are not Muslim? What must they be thinking about me and my family? So I sort of took a lot of breaks, went on holiday for a while, travelled around the world, ended up in some very strange places, and came back full circle, realising that the faith that my parents brought to the United Kingdom, where there was no dichotomy between being British and Muslim, or in their cases, originally Indian and Muslim or Pakistani and Muslim, and the fact that the faith was a personal spiritual relationship that they had with God, is the same that the majority of Muslims around the world were believing in. But there was something going on. So I left everything what I was doing, and I found myself setting up an NGO and then setting up some media companies to pay the bills, and really focusing on understanding what's going on within our communities. We did a survey at the time. I commissioned a survey, again around about 2004, something like this. It was a year survey with one PhD from University of Manchester and somebody who was a candidate, and I paid them. And we surveyed 1,500 Muslims face to face in the country, in the whole of the United Kingdom, half male, half female. The response to one open question that frightened the life out of me. And that question was, name a Muslim role model. And many people said the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. Some people said Muhammad Ali the boxer, as you'd imagine. 4-point-something%, I think it was around about 4.8 or 4.9% of the people surveyed said Osama bin Laden.
And this was around 2003, you said?
It's approximately 3, 4. It was some, I think maybe 2004.
So
we
pretty
started
soon after 9/11 happened, when he
absolutely.
was the most wanted person in the world.
Absolutely. It was an open question. So that frightened the life out of me, and I thought, I've got to do something with this. So I found myself in a very strange place in the United Kingdom Foreign Office, where they had this division called Engaging with the Muslim World. It sounds really, I call it the bigotry of low expectations, as if we're all the same, take us to your leader kind of thing. And they had this group, and I presented my findings, and they were very patronizing. And I said, we're going to have a 9/11 here in the United Kingdom, and the data shows it's going to be homegrown. And they sort of turned around, there, don't worry about it. And I'll never forget what somebody said. And he said, don't worry, we're not like the Americans. We talk to our extremists. We talk to Abu Hamza. We talk to Bakri. We talk to all of these people. They want to do something over there and not here, and kind of go away, don't worry about it. And I thought to myself, well, these guys should know what they're doing. They're responsible for protecting my country, my home. So maybe they know something that I don't know. 7/7 happened, and I found myself very, very quickly at Downing Street, talking to Tony Blair, talking to Hazel Blears.
Can you explain what 7/7 was?
7/7 was a terrorist attack that we had in London on the 7th of July in 2005. We say 7/7 in the US in the same way that they say 9/11. A very key moment for us in the UK. It was our first major Islamist terrorist attack. And I found myself with government. I found myself in a task force preventing extremism, a task force that Tony Blair and his Prime Minister set up, and trying to find ways that we, from a civil society and from a government top down, could actually prevent further attacks, or rather not prevent attacks, prevent extremism continuing, because the numbers weren't big at the time. And I just found myself in a strange situation, and then my life never changed. My life's been a very strange life ever since.
So as a Muslim man, you were born and raised Muslim, you have a Muslim wife, a Muslim daughter. Can you explain to me a little bit the difference between being a Muslim and being an Islamist?
In the same way that there's a difference between social and socialism, there is a difference between Islam and Islamism. Social might be the way that we're interacting, maybe in a coffee shop, maybe hanging out, talking to each other. Socialism is a distinct political ideology that happens to be left of center. Islam is a religion that's 1400 years old, practiced by 1.9 billion people around the world in so many different ways, often kind of cursing the other for not being a proper Muslim, excommunicating each other, etc., etc. And it always has been started off as a personal relationship, a spiritual relationship that the individual has with God. Islamism is a distinct political ideology as defined by the Islamists themselves. The Ikhwan al-Muslimin, the Muslim Brotherhood, called themselves Islamiyun to differentiate themselves from other Muslims at the time, literally translating to Islamists. And it really has two objectives. One is to set up a utopian Islamist state, and a bit like ISIS tried to do, a bit like Iran's, I shouldn't say Iran, I should say the Iranian regime is doing, to set up this state and enforce a version of law based on their interpretation of Sharia, which actually means a personal path to the oasis or purification, as state law on everybody else. Never been done fully in 1400 years of Islam's existence until the last century. The second thing they want to do is to actually spread that faith or that belief or that political system around the world. And if you think about it, countries around the world are not going to say, hey, come on in, we're going to change our liberal democracies. It involves fighting, war, or something like that. And so when you find people say that Islamists are non-violence, etc., it's a tactic. Ultimately, if you understand these are the two things that they want to achieve, it's going to, unless all of a sudden we believe that, Muslims are the only people that God is actually supporting and is forgetting about all the other human beings that God has created and has got them, God's going to change everybody else's hearts and say, hey, no fighting, come and do this, come and plant your flag in our country. It's going to involve war. The third thing I say, and I believe it's a tactic, the tactic is the opium of the masses. And the opium of the masses is to destroy Israel and wipe it off the map. But ultimately, if Israel didn't exist, the ideology would create something else. By the way, I touched upon Sharia-based law. I think it's also very important that to recognize that there is no such thing as Sharia law as state law. And I'll explain why. When we talk about Sharia law in English, we're actually using law as the noun and Sharia as the adjective describing the noun. The word for law is qanun in Arabic. If you find an electronic set of hadith or you set up a Quran, for example, you won't find that word anywhere. But you will find the word Sharia. And in that case, in Arabic, it's a noun, literally meaning the personal path to purification or the oasis. Everybody's Sharia is a personal code. There is, however, such a thing as jurisprudence, fiqh, and you have it in Tel Aviv. I've been to, and you have different schools of jurisprudence. I've sat in Tel Aviv on a delegation that I went in many, many years ago, where there was, in inverted commas, Sharia courts, but for personal family law and things like that. And they were using jurisprudence based from Imam Abu Hanifa. That is okay, but there's no such thing as Sharia law as state law. It's for personal matters. And you can pick this school of jurisprudence, you can pick this one, you can pick that one, or you don't have to. So when somebody says Sharia law, which Sharia, which law? Yeah,
because Sharia law is basically your own way of interpreting
your
direction, not the interpretation, but the direction to being,
absolutely.
Getting to the oasis.
I'll give you an example. The Quran says very clearly, don't eat pork. It's very clear. However, there are certain instances, circumstances, that I would have to eat pork. I have no choice. And that is law and jurisprudence. And the context is there was nothing else to eat. There was only pork available. So, and if I didn't eat it, I was committing suicide. Therefore, eat. You must eat enough, but just to survive. So there is flexibility in every single thing apart from the belief in one God, the God of Abraham, and the God of prophets before Abraham as well. Everything else depends on your context, on what your path is, what the surroundings of your path are, and therefore there has never ever been, until the last century, Sharia law as state law on everybody. If we believe that Islamism is the desire to enforce a version of law based on an interpretation of Sharia, a state law across all its citizens, somebody who supports that with violence or the justification of violence is a jihadist. Because the word jihad doesn't mean holy war. The Arabic word for holy war is harb al-muqaddasa, and it's been used many times in the past. There are so many, I read a paper from a heavyweight scholar that said there were 13 classifications of jihad, which means struggle. One of them is fighting, and the best one being, the most spiritual one being Jihad al-Akbar, which is the great jihad, is the day-to-day battle that we as human beings have to do good rather than evil. You know, the heavens and the earth can't contain me. This is the Hadith Qudsi, and that means an extra utterance of the Quran. The heavens and the earth can't contain God. What can contain God is the heart of a believer. Didn't say the heart of a Muslim. Didn't say the heart of a Christian. Didn't say the heart of a Jew. The word mu'min, the heart of a believer. I have no idea who's walking down the street, what color that person might be, irrelevant, whether that person's wearing a hijab or not, or whether the person dressed in a particular way. I don't know what's in that person's heart. So therefore, I don't know if God is in that person's heart. And that Hadith Qudsi is very, very clear on that. And even the word Islam. When I was 15, my class did English and maths GCSEs a year early because we were supposed to be smart. And I did my English a year early, got a great grade, and which meant that I then, from 15 to 16, read English literature. And we happened to read The Merchant of Venice. And I looked at the English and I thought, wow, my English is great. I've just got a great grade. Could I understand Shakespeare? No. And yet it was written in English 200 years from before I picked it up. And I thought I've just got a great grade in my GCSE English. I should be able to understand it. So I went to my teacher and he said, you know what? Go to the shop and get some commentaries from people and maybe that'll help you. So I went to W.H. Smith's, which was our local shop, and I bought 3 commentaries from 3 different Shakespearean scholars and got 3 different interpretations. And that's when I first learned that words are all about interpretation and what they mean to you. So that's the first thing I'll say. If you look at the Quran is 1400 years old. Do you think the people who speak Arabic now speak the same Arabic in the same way that the people we no longer speak Shakespearean English? So I looked at a lot of the traditional classical scholars and what the word Islam means. To me, reading so much and going down the rabbit hole, Islam means to submit to one deity. There are many names. Allah happens to be one of the names. There are many names in the Torah. There are many names in the Zabur. There are many names in the Bible. But the same God. To submit to one deity and attain inner peace. That's the daily struggle between good and evil. And to spread outer peace. And that's why we say, Assalamu alaikum. Or in Hebrew, Judaism, Shalom alaikum. We're spreading outer peace. Anybody. And the word Muslim or Muslimin means somebody who's doing that. Anybody who is doing that is a Muslimin and therefore is a practitioner of what Islam is meant to be. And later on it became a codified religion. So even terminology has been hijacked, not just by certain Muslims, but even by people in the West who will just fall for the Islamist trap. I've got 9 translations and interpretations of English, the Quran in English at home. When my father died when I was 24, I wanted to be a good Muslim for my father so that God would have mercy on his soul and my actions could, maybe God would have mercy on him. So I read avidly. For the first time in my life, I read the Quran in English, and the only translations, interpretations of the Quran I could get are the same ones that the Muslim Brotherhood, the Jamaat Islami, Al-Qaeda, Wahhabis, Islamists. That's all I could get.
Wow.
I didn't have access to anything else in English. So I've got 9 copies of the Quran at home in English. Recently I got one from Dr. Safi Kaskas and I read it, and I then compared it to interpretations from others. Even people talk about Ibn Kathir as a translator, a commentary of the Quran, and then say, oh, I read Ibn Kathir's commentary in English. Well, he actually didn't speak English. Somebody else has translated and interpreted it. So I don't fall for that. To me, it was this interpretation and translation from my teachers, Sheikh Hisham Kabani and Sheikh Nazim, and my father, my late father, is the closest thing to what they've told me. So when we read translations and interpretations of the Quran, in English, I guarantee you, I don't guarantee you, but my hunch is that 90% plus of the time, you're reading the same interpretations, translations as Al-Qaeda would promote, or ISIS would promote, or the Muslim Brotherhood would promote, etc. That's not traditional classical Islam. It's been hijacked by the Islamists, but also in the West, we've fallen for it.
We've seen that Europe has had an incredible uptick of extremist ideology really infiltrating different parts of Europe in such a strong and powerful way in different facets of the society. Why do you think that the Muslim Brotherhood or extremism in general has been able to infiltrate Europe so much? Why is Europe specifically so susceptible to this sort of infiltration?
How long have you got? Okay, let's try and break this down into certain bite-sized chunks. Post the First World War, we saw the collapse of the empires, the Ottoman Empire, the British Empire, other empires. They were the 2 main ones. When they left, nature abhors a vacuum. It was filled by certain isms. And in Europe, we saw the creation, the rise of fascism and communism. In the Middle East, we saw Islamism, as described. We saw Pan-Arabism, and we saw Ba'athism. Following on from World War II, a lot of people, a lot of men mainly, but a lot of people generally, lost their lives after World War II, which meant that in order to rebuild the economy, Europe needed mass migration. We say my country, the United Kingdom, even though we sort of left the EU project, we're part of Europe, which we technically are. We are. There was a difference in the migration. In the UK, most of the migration came from Commonwealth countries. And from a Muslim perspective, they were from the Indian subcontinent, but you also had other Commonwealth countries as well. In Europe, a lot of that migration came, for France, for example, in the colonies that they had, Tunisia, Algeria, etc. And nobody in those days looked at these people that came and identified these people by their religion. It was they came from these countries. Okay. A lot of people came, and they were mainly economic migrants. Then what happened was that post, I would say, 1970, we started getting an influx of certain ideologies. And for the United Kingdom, first of all, it wasn't the Muslim Brotherhood, it was Jamaat Islami from India, which was founded by Maududi. And Qutb, who was one of the ideologues of the Muslim Brotherhood, actually learned from Maududi. You can say they're fellow travelers and they have the same objectives, but one was an Indian subcontinent movement to oppose to British rule, and the other one was an Egyptian movement opposed to British rule also.
And he was during the whole partition in 1948?
Absolutely. He was pre the partition.
Pre the partition.
And then afterwards as well. So in the United Kingdom, we saw a lot of people coming in from as economic migrants initially, and then Maududi actually sent two people in particular to the United Kingdom to set up organizations, whether they're academic, whether they're civil society, to try to influence policy change and build capacity amongst the people that had come from the Indian subcontinent that didn't really know a lot about their faith or their religion or their deen or their way of life, and to try initially to convert them to their way of life. In the 1980s, we saw a lot of people from the Muslim Brotherhood come from North Africa and other places as certain countries started to tighten up. And of course, in those days, the Muslim Brotherhood was heavily backed by countries such as Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Bahrain, Kuwait. All of them were backing the Muslim Brotherhood with billions of dollars to spread this project. If you look at the Tariq Ramadan's father, Sada Ramadan, he was one of the people that was sent with his brother to Switzerland with a whole bunch of money, getting into Aachen and spreading this project. So that's the United Kingdom. In Europe, we had this, the Muslim Brotherhood primarily. Nevertheless, they are Islamist ideologies, both of them. Sometimes competing, sometimes working together. There has been, over the last 43 years plus, a plan by Islamists, they initially called the Project, to actually infiltrate these societies, to influence their surroundings, to eventually undermine the liberal democracies and try to take over as much as they can. That's been one thing. The other thing is that I think that over the recent decades, let's just take my country for a minute, the United Kingdom, we actually have lost what it means to be British or English or Scottish or Welsh or whatever you want to call it. The very fact that there isn't enough within our society to actually say these are the values now in these days that we adhere to means that when you get extreme views, you actually see people being pulled apart. And because they've got nothing, people are often looking for something. I never saw a hijab in the United Kingdom or a niqab until I was about 18 years old when I went to university. And it's almost became a tribal. A bit like when I was a punk rocker when I was 14. There was
Human beings are tribal people.
Exactly.
We gravitate towards being part of a collective.
Exactly. And it was something for these people to belong to. And sometimes there was racism, there were other things. And if you look at the pathways that drive people to extremism, it often starts with a genuine problem, a partial problem, or a perceived problem. And a genuine problem could be racism. It could be you want to get married and you can't get. It could be anything. A partial problem could be something like the United Kingdom foreign policy, where there is some truth. But I often say, well, actually, if foreign policy was the only thing that drove people to extremism, why did thousands of Muslims from Europe fly into Iraq and Syria and join ISIS and kill other Muslims? But there is some partial truth in it that radicalizers will actually use. And then you have perceived problems which are not genuine at all. Charismatic recruiters, online and offline, will actually feed solutions to these people that people will take, and they'll create a paradigm. That paradigm is the ideology of Islamism in this case. But in there are, at a macro level, five psychological groupthink behaviors that they create. The first one is belonging to a group. The second one is that anybody who's not in that group is different to them. Mm-hmm. The third one is that group that you belong to is actually being victimized. You're victims of something. The fourth one is that anybody who's not in that group is actually complicit in that, in undermining you or actually turning you into victims. Then you get the supremacism narrative. And up until then, in a liberal democracy, that's not illegal to have these views. ISIS and Al-Qaeda and Hamas don't actually radicalize anybody. This is done by groups like the Muslim Brotherhood and the Jamaat Islami. Along come these groups that are jihadist and tip some of them over the edge, turn them to violence in two ways. One is that self-defense is essential and violence is self-internalized. And for that whole process, you need charismatic recruiters, you need an identity, you need an ideology, and a change of identity.
You were specifically talking about all these extremely well-known terrorist organizations, that they're not exactly recruiting people, but we have the Muslim Brotherhood who is doing the bulk of the recruiting. We know that through the project that they made a plan years ago to infiltrate the West through methods of soft power. How have we seen that play in action in Europe, in the US? What are different methods of soft power that we see coming into fruition today and that they're actually kind of working?
So far we've actually analysed halfway points almost of the strategy being developed for the United States. And hopefully we'll do that for other countries as well as sort of part two of what we're doing. I want to say that the research that we did, and it's a 225-page report, it's I don't know, 600-700 citations, original source text, etc. If I was them and I actually took a step back and actually said, where are we with our strategy? I would be so pleased, beyond expectations. There are 4 key ideologues in this strategy, in the project, 4 key phases. The first one was the founder of the Muslim Brotherhood, Hassan al-Banna. And he set the foundation. He really talked about gradualism, do it slowly. And he initially actually was a lot more spiritual than some of the other ideologues later on. Then you had Sayyid Qutb, and he was a bit more revolutionary. And his book Milestones is required reading if you want to understand the ideology at its core of the Muslim Brotherhood. Then you had the famous Yusuf al-Qaradawi. He basically said, let's adopt this strategy and let's make it more pragmatic. Let's take the gradualism, let's take the revolutionary from Qutb, and let's be a bit more pragmatic. Let's do it softly. Let's get into different aspects of civil society, political, charities, actually infiltrating and engaging with people who are non-Muslim. From the left initially, because there are some really good synergies between Qutb and the left, and narrative control. How do we control the media? How do we control education? How do we make Muslims? So these are the key sort of elements. And then somebody that people don't talk about that much, who is actually still alive, Salabi. He's a lot more militant. He's taken everything from the previous 3, and what he's done is said, Islamic State now. Let's do it now. Hamas love him, by the way. Let's do it now. Let's take action now. And this whole strategy of institutional entrenchment within the West is called tamkeen. And a lot of people over the last 20 years or so have sort of looked at different aspects of it. For the first time, we at ISGAP have put together the whole tamkeen strategy. It's the who, it's the why, it's the where, it's the how are they doing, and where are they doing it. It's a complete analysis I would be, if I was Hassan al-Banna, I'd be so happy in my grave. If I was Qaradawi, they're exceeding their expectations.
So you mentioned previously that their goal is to create a sort of utopia of Sharia law. Is that the phrasing that you used?
No, I said just to create a utopian state.
A utopian state, exactly. What exactly does a utopian state look like for the Muslim Brotherhood?
First of all, using law based on their interpretation of Sharia and controlling the masses. That's the first thing. Making it totalitarian, autocratic, top-down, a medieval interpretation that one does not have the rights that a liberal democracy gives them, and you are it's a bit like communism. If you look at Qutb, Sayyid Qutb, the main ideologue that I mentioned, he flirted with Marxism before he wrote Milestones.
Really?
Yeah, and that's why the left, and so the marriage between the left and Islamism, in many ways, when somebody from sort of the regressive left hears some of these things, when they're not sold as an Islamic thing, they're familiar. So he used a lot of that. He never was a Marxist because he actually, the only reason why he didn't go full on Marxist was because he actually still had a belief in God. Mm-hmm. But there were a lot of things he took from there. And by the way, they didn't invent this strategy of tamkeen. They took a lot of the things from, if you read Animal Farm, you'll see a lot of things, see a lot of things that actually are very similar. Mm-hmm. In fact, one of my former colleagues, Majid Nawaz, who spent 5 years in Mubarak's torture chambers when he was a very young, I think he was 18 or 19, because Hizb ut-Tahrir sent him to Egypt to try and instigate a military coup post 9/11, and Mubarak rounded everybody up. He wasn't Islamist, he wasn't a good guy then. He was in prison, and he's got a book and he's written all about it. And the chairman and founder of Quilliam, he used to say that one of the things that put this critical thinking about all the indoctrination that he'd had as a youngster was when, for the first time in Mubarak's torture chambers, he read Animal Farm and thought, wow.
This rings a little too true.
And that's the process, how it started for him to come out of it. If you read Animal Farm, you'll see a lot of similarities between Islamism and communism, and you'll see that there is a natural fit. And the interesting thing now, you asked about extremism. So we coined a phrase, my previous organisation that I was CEO of, Quilliam Foundation, later went on to become Quilliam International. And we started as an organisation, well, I wasn't one of the founders, but I joined it later on to sort of build it and do various things. It started as an organisation, the world's first counter-extremism think tank in 2006 or 7. And it started to purely deal with the Islamist terrorist threat and the Islamist extremism threat. There is a difference between terrorism and extremism, violence and non-violent, but the pathway is the journey between empathy, sympathy, and material support for terrorism can be as short as 1.5 to 2 weeks. According to Gilles de Kerkhove, who was sitting next to me, he used to be the EU coordinator for counterterrorism, and he said it as a matter of public record. Actually, he said 2 weeks, as short as 2 weeks. So we started with this Islamist threat. Along the way, we found ourselves dealing with what we coined the triple threat to our liberal democracies, this natural marriage through tamkeen, this strategy between Islamist and the regressive left. And now we're seeing that they're actually targeting and getting into the actual far right, or some of the nationalist far right. And so this horseshoe theory, if you like, you've got left enough, you've got right, you've got these people merging and working with each other. And the thing that binds them all together is that they hate Jews and they hate Israel. And as Elie Wiesel said, what starts with the Jews never ends with the Jews. If they were ever to eradicate the Jews, God forbid, if they were ever to do that, they'll just turn on each other. But right now they have common friends, a common cause. So extremism that we're dealing with in Europe right now is actually a triple threat. But the Islamists and tamkeen is really the driving force. The alliance between the left, the regressive left, and the totalitarian Islamists has created a backlash from the nationalist movements. And of course, even the nationalists now, even the ones that actually say they support Israel right now and are not anti-Semitic, We know they are. And they're picking my enemy's enemy is my friend kind of situation for now. It's tactical. This is what Europe's facing. And of course, add to that, a little known fact, and it's in the reports and you can't deny it, is that one of the strategies that they outlined was to increase Muslim migration into Western countries.
And we're seeing that very much in action currently, especially with all the issues that have been going on in the Middle East in the last 2 decades.
Yeah.
But what's very interesting that you're talking about the horseshoe theory is there's nothing really in common that the left and radical Islamists, they don't have much in common at all except for their hatred of Jews. And somebody mentioned that the first sign of a downfall of a civilization is when they start targeting the Jews.
Absolutely. Somebody said it was the way to test the health of any nation is to see how they're treating the Jews.
Exactly.
History's taught us that. History
has taught us that. And now we're seeing this very interesting change in Western nations that in my lifetime I have never seen and I've never been exposed to. And it's something that we always heard from our elders growing up. History repeats itself. And we never thought it would happen in my lifetime, at least. But we've been seeing in Western countries that this is very much happening. And a lot of it can be attested to the influence that the Muslim Brotherhood has had in Ivy League universities, in K through 12, in so many different facets of Western society. How can we stop this? And is it too late to stop it?
That's a very good question. Hamas achieved something that I think was beyond their wildest dreams on October the 7th. They created something, or the people, their supporters, created something that initially I was calling Hamas International as a working title for a while. They united, first of all, different sects within Islam that often cursed each other, excommunicated each other over an emotional common cause. They then were able to work with the left. Most countries over the last few years, if you look at most institutions, you look at the bureaucracy in government, etc., in the US, Europe, etc., are kind of institutionally left of centre. Not far left, but left of centre. But they actually built this relationship with the left and now with the right. This has actually driven a phenomenon that actually I've labelled, but we use at ISGAP, of Islamism beyond Islamist and Islam. That means that the ideas, the objectives of Islamism have seeped into our civil society, and the recent catalyst was Hamas on October the 7th. But it didn't happen overnight. If you look at the decades pre-October the 7th, and some keen as a strategy, in any institutional entrenchment, to move a society or a group of people towards a particular viewpoint, you need the Tamkeen strategy. But you also need money. How do you fund this movement? And until Mohammed bin Salman, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, came into Saudi Arabia and made some wonderful reforms. He's a guy that actually said that he wanted to turn the Middle East into the new Europe, and said very clearly Israel is part of that. You know, he doesn't want the river to the sea. He wants Israel to play its role in there. And until he came into power, Saudi Arabia was one of the biggest funders of this strategy. And at one time, so was the UAE, and so were all the other Middle Eastern countries, Bahrain, Kuwait, etc. The decades of funding, the decades of this strategy, was bound to have an effect from our university. Look at our universities. Actually, the biggest foreign funder, state funder to our universities is Qatar. And Qatar is the last man standing within the Middle East of supporting the Muslim Brotherhood Islamist ideology. We estimated in one of our reports, Networks of Hate, that they use soft power. And not so soft power, but if we just look at their soft power investments and control, it's a small country, 300-something thousand citizens, who around the world, according to our estimate, have something in between $500 billion to $1 trillion worth of soft power assets. They've now been brought into universities. We did a report on Texas A&M, and first time we launched it, it was a bit flat. So then we relaunched it, and this time we thought, okay, this has to go somewhere. And eventually it ended up going viral in Texas. And it went viral because a sports commentator, a football commentator, actually read it. I can't remember his name, but he was a huge online social media presence. He just blew it up, and it went everywhere. And we found that we actually found their contracts, its original source information. And we found that they'd given so much money, $1 billion, I can't remember the amount, it was $1 billion plus dollars or something around there. And there were two things that worried us. Actually, three things that worried us. One was that as part of the contract, and we found the contracts as well, all of the research, they owned the IP. The second thing was that there was a connection between Texas A&M in Doha, and in Houston, or near Houston, College City, that there was a relationship between them, and there was a lot of cross-fertilization between teachers, etc., and the teachers had to actually practice an element of cultural sensitivity, which meant that they couldn't actually behave in a way, if they were teaching in Doha, etc., in a way that you'd expect critical inquiry within a liberal democracy, i.e. LGBT rights and various other things. And the third one that worried me, as part of the IP, we believed that there was a significant percentage of the research that could be used for dual purpose, including nuclear. And the final thing, there was one other thing. The other thing was that they had access to all students' information. So when we put this report out, the governor got involved, other people got involved, it went viral. The president of Texas A&M actually doubled down and said, this is all disinformation. None of our IP, none of the research projects have dual purpose. So we got some of the independents to come in and actually look at the contracts, and we found that in between 5 to 10% of the actual contracts at least had potential dual purpose. And then as a result of that and whatever else happened in the background, Texas A&M decided to pull out of Doha. Qatar is a country, is a state that is still supporting Muslim Brotherhood activities, I should say Muslim Brotherhood aligned activities around the world, and Islamist, hence Islamist. And our universities for decades have had, look, if you're going to give billions of dollars to a university, there is for sure going to be some conditions that surround that, and some of them are, and this is why I mentioned the cultural sensitivity and the way Islam is taught and what type of Islam is taught, etc., and especially the region in the Middle East and Israel and the Palestinians, it's going to see some change. And the encampments and the professors and the students that we've seen, we can't say it's all down to Qatar, but it is down to Tamkeen, Qatar, and in the past, and thank God Saudi Arabia and countries like that are now on the side of being anti-Islamist. It's not happened overnight, and it's money by these countries, it's institutional entrenchment, universities were a front line, but then you've got all the other aspects of civil society as well.
It's a bit overwhelming to hear everything and how much our society has been infiltrated. What are some tangible steps that Western societies can take to protect civil society?
First thing you have to understand is, what are these people doing and how are they doing it? And in this case, please do read the book. It's not a book, the report, because it explains it and we took our time. In the same way that in a Western, not these days, but let's go back 5 years or 10 years, in the same way that civil society in the West would stand up to racists, in the same way that civil society in the West has stood up to fascists, in the same way that civil society has stood up to communists, we need a broad range, cross-spectrum of people who are Muslims, non-Muslims, Jewish, Christian, people of faith, no faith, who actually buy into certain values which are our human rights, which are our liberal democratic values, to come together and take this challenge on. If we said this is a Muslim problem on its own, never going to win. If we said it's a Jewish problem on its own, never going to win. This is a British problem. This is an American problem. This is a French problem. This now, because it's transnational, is a liberal democratic problem. So the first thing we need to build is actually build coalitions and not fall for the trap that all of Islam is bad. You know, there are some people who say that Islam is the problem. There are some people that say it's got nothing to do with Islam. The reality is they're both partially right and they're both partially wrong. It has got something to do with Islam, and what that is a particular interpretation of Islam from Islamists, which actually is a plausible interpretation, is contemporary, but one of many. There is no one Islam. So don't fall for that trap, and look for values, look for things that we all believe in as human beings. Build these coalitions. That's the first thing we need to do. Stop blaming anybody else who's the other and fall for these stereotypes, these tropes, and all of these things. Don't be anti-Muslim, don't be anti-Jew. It doesn't matter to me who you are or what you are. Are you a human being? Do you believe in the same things that I believe in? I'm your ally. That's number one. Number two, there has to be a top-down, bottom-up approach. Governments need to actually, first of all, get off the bandwagon of trying to be politically correct. We have a problem. Name the problem. Don't be afraid of naming the problem. The problem is Islamism, and then differentiate it between Islam. Because if you don't name the problem, extremists will name it for you. Secondly, better policy is required, and of course, ISGAP is pushing hard to have the Muslim Brotherhood designated as a foreign terrorist, as an FTO, foreign terrorist organisation. There is no Muslim Brotherhood entity in the United States or the UK. They don't exist. They're not a 501c3. They're not a limited company, but they do have organisations that are aligned. The first step is actually to recognise, in the same way that Saudi Arabia, UAE, Bahrain, Jordan, Egypt have banned the Muslim Brotherhood in some form or another, they must know something that we don't know. And the cynic could turn around and say, well, they're only doing it because, yes, they were involved before and supported and helped to create it, etc., and now they're doing it for themselves. I don't care. If they're doing it for themselves, they're recognised as a danger to them. They did it.
Yeah.
And it's a danger. Obviously, human beings, states typically tend to look at their own interests, and therefore they've all recognised that the Muslim Brotherhood is a threat to them. So let's work closely with them. Let's work with them. And let's listen to them. When Saudi Arabia or the UAE say, ban the Muslim Brotherhood, why? Give us evidence. Let's FTO. That's not the problem. That won't solve the problem on its own. What do you do with the proxies that are American, set up by American citizens, set up by people who were part of, if you look at the memorandum, so you have the project, which was the strategy, and then the exploratory memorandum for North America, which is the how to do it in North America. There were organizations that were named in there that were their proxies. And then some of those people went off and formed other organizations. And then they went and did more. What did we do about these people? Well, we need to make it more difficult. We need to use our liberal democratic principles and processes to actually recognize that they're using our very own systems and processes against us. Use the same ones against them. Make it difficult for civil society. Challenge them. Make it difficult for them to indoctrinate youngsters. Make it difficult for them to actually gain access to politicians.
Like how the US did with the KKK.
Perfect example. The KKK was never banned. It's never been banned in the UK. Never been banned in the US. But look at all the other steps they took to make their activities criminal or to actually disrupt them. We must do that. If we don't do that, we're going to lose. There is hope. There is hope because I believe there is still the silent majority. I'm optimistic that there is. I hope that as top-down politicians, civil society, educators, academia, etc., we can get together. We can re-identify what it means to be British, what it means to be American, what it means to be French, etc., etc. Yes, there are differences. What it means to be living in a liberal democracy, irrespective of colour, race, religion, creed, whatever. I do believe and hope that there are enough of us still out there, working together to disrupt, using the law when it's needed, using other tactics, using other principles, education, etc. We need to push back and reverse engineer what they're doing.
Haras Rafiq, I learned a lot from you today, and thank you so much for giving us your time.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.